The rule of law means general rules of law that bind all people, including the government. The rule of law is supposed to be what? Above politics. So you men, if you want to do well in life, you want rule of law. How do you plan your role in society? How do you plan your business? How do you know what business to do tomorrow if we have no rule of law at all? We have to restore the Constitution along with restoring the rule of law, or we'll end up with gulags. Restoring men and history. Arrest. Need it be said that it is a breaking point in your life, a bolt of lightning which has scored a direct hit on you. That it is a spiritual earthquake not every person can cope with, as a result of which people often slip into insanity. The universe has as many different centers as there are living beings in it. Each of us is a center of the universe, and the universe is shattered when they hiss at you. You are under arrest. If you are arrested, can anything else remain unshattered by this cataclysm? But the darkened mind is incapable of embracing these displacements in our universe, and both the most sophisticated and the veriest simpleton among us, drawing on all life's experience, can gasp only out, "Me, what for?" And this is a question which, though repeated millions and millions of times, has yet to receive an answer. Arrest is an instantaneous, shattering thrust, expulsion, somersault from one state to another. Imagine it while you're sitting there. We have been happily born, or perhaps unhappily dragged our weary way down the long and crooked streets of our lives, past all kinds of walls and fences made of rotting wood, earth, brick, concrete, and railings. We've never given a thought to what lies behind them. We've never tried to penetrate them with our vision or our understanding. But there's where the gulag country begins, right next to us, 2 yards away from us. In addition, we have failed to notice an enormous number of closely fitted, well-disguised doors and gates in these fences. All these gates were prepared for us, every last one. And all of a sudden, the fateful gate swings quickly open, and 4 white male hands, unaccustomed to physical labor, but nonetheless strong and tenacious, grab us by the leg, arm, collar, cap, ear, and drag us like a sack. And the gate behind us, the gate to our past life, is slammed shut once and for all. That's all there is to it. You are arrested. And you'll find nothing better to respond with than a lamb-like bleat. "Me? What for?" That's what arrest is. It's a blinding flash and a blow which shifts the present instantly into the past, and impossible in omnipotent actuality. That's all. And neither for the first hour nor for the first day will you be able to grasp anything else. Except in your desperation of the fake circus moon will blink at you. It's a mistake. They'll set things right. We would appreciate it if you would subscribe and help us build better, stronger men. So that's the opening to the Gulag Archipelago, written by Solzhenitsyn, which is a fantastic book. Maybe we'll come back. I just put it in the introduction for this piece on what caused that. Well, of course, there were many things why that happened in Russia, but rule of law was one of them, one piece, and today we're going to talk about rule of law in America, how it's an American principle, how it's important to you and your family and your freedom. Without rule of law, and by the way, rule of law takes what else? They always say this, a rule of nation of laws, not of men. But here I would say you need a nation of laws and of virtuous men. So, of course, there were many reasons why that happened. Here, our Constitution lays out rule of law. We have separation of powers and things that protect you from, in theory, the gulag happening here. Federalism, states' power, the states, the 50 states and their powers. Why do we want rule of law? Why is it important to you, your family, your business? So we're going to go through some different definitions of rule of law because it's very important for your freedom and your family, how you build businesses, how do you make profits, how you protect your life, liberty, and property. So let's start with the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy from the Rule of Law, Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. The most important demand, it says, of the rule of law is that people in positions of authority should exercise their power within a constraining framework. So notice it already starts out with the most important demand of rule of law is that people in positions of authority should exercise their power within a constraining framework of well-established public norms rather than in what? An arbitrary or ad hoc or purely discretionary manner. Why? Because if it's purely discretionary or ad hoc or arbitrary, how do you plan your life? How do you plan your role in society? How do you plan your business? How do you know what business to do tomorrow? How does Charles know what to do with his cigar business tomorrow if we have no rule of law at all? It insists that the government should operate with a framework of law in everything it does, and that it should be accountable through law when there is a suggestion of unauthorized action by those in power. So we know we have some issues and problems with rule of law. Many believe we're post-rule of law, and many believe that the rule of law is dead. But here's the thing. We're going to look at rule of law today because to restore it, you need to know it. And for your freedom and to protect your freedom, you need to stand for it peacefully and voice your support of it and stand for it. So first, law should be accessible. It should be a body of norms promulgated as public knowledge. So you need to be able to know what it says, right? Not hidden back in Congress or hidden back. As public knowledge so that people can study it, so you can study, memorize it, internalize it, not memorize it, just internalize it, figure out what it requires of them and use it as a framework for their plans and expectations and for settling their disputes with others. So you need to know the law so you can be able to get along with others and settle your disputes with them, right? Do contracts, right? Do business. Secondly, legal institutions and their procedures should be available to ordinary people to uphold their rights, settle their disputes, and protect them against abuses of public and private power. All of this, in turn, requires the independence of the judiciary, the accountability of government officials, the transparency of public business. So notice those three. Those are pretty important. Independence of the judiciary, the accountability of government officials. They have to be accountable to it too. And they have to be accountable. The transparency of public business, transparency of the government. We need to see everything. The integrity of legal procedures. So why is this important? It's important to be able to operate your life and build your businesses, right, men? So you men, if you want to do well in life, you want rule of law, not rule of man, not arbitrary tomorrow. They may change it or they may go back and make it retroactive and make you a criminal with some law, right? You want rule of law. We don't want the government favoring certain individuals or certain groups. We don't want them penalizing certain groups because you're in that group, or penalizing certain individuals for ideology or political purposes, right? In America, we don't want political opponents threatened, or we don't want the law used against political opponents. We don't want free speech like the person who did the meme in Palm Beach who just got, what happened with him? He did a meme and they have now used the law to politically go after him. Political. So we don't want that here. But here we will say this. We broke away from a king. In America, we don't have a king. We don't have arbitrary. We don't have one man creating just laws. Back to Stanford. Some theorists draw a distinction, and this is interesting and important, between the rule of law and by what they call rule by law. So rule of law, rule by law. And so do you know what the difference between rule of law and rule by law is? And this is interesting because you can see where you can be, if you're moving toward rule by law, not rule of law, you're moving toward what? What are you moving towards? Totalitarianism, right? So the rule of law is supposed to be what? Above politics. That's what this says. And that's true. The idea is that the law should stand above every powerful person and agency in the law. That means powerful people, and you've heard this, are not above the law, right? You've heard that lately a lot. It means a bureaucrat, a person in charge of an agency, is not above the law. It's not just for ordinary Americans. It's for those in charge. And I think we've seen myriad problems with that. So no person or agency should be above the law. Rule by law, in contrast, connotes the instrumental use of law as a tool of political power. Rule by law. So stop and ask yourself if you've seen that in the past decade. So it means that the state uses law to control its citizens, but tries never to allow law to be used to control the state. Did you get that? See? It means the state uses law to control the citizens, but never to allow law to control what? The big state. Now, who thinks like that? Now, watch the congressional hearings and just reflect on it after you watch certain people going before the congressional hearings and see if they believe they're above the law. I think you'll see that they believe they're above you, the people, and the law, the way they answer the questions, and in the arrogant way that they do, some of them. Are they servants to the people, and do they know it? No, not really. Many of them, right? Rule by law is associated with the debasement of legality by authoritarian regimes. In modern China, for example, it says. Thomas Hobbes may be seen as a theorist of rule by law. In a society whose members disagree about property, he thought it conducive to peace for the sovereign of a society to make some common rules for all men and to declare them publicly, by which every man may know what may be called his. But Hobbes also thought it would undermine peace. Indeed, it would undermine the very logic of sovereignty for the ultimate lawmaker to be bound by the laws he applied to his subjects. Think about that. Notice he didn't want them to be bound by the law. He didn't want the lawmaker to be bound by it, right? So we see people in government like that today, right? We have over the past years, and it's been going on a long time, but you especially saw it in the last 3 years, right? Mandates that the ones in power didn't want to follow, but they wanted you to follow. And that was just a mandate, not a law, some of those. But you see it with the laws too, right? Targeting. So we're not going to, maybe we'll do another whole video on that. Today, we just want to focus on the rule of law, what it means so we can restore it. So if it's damaged and denigrated, and some people believe it's dead, let's restore it. So we have to know what it is to restore it. Judge Andrew Napolitano defines the rule of law this way in this article where he says the rule of law doesn't exist in DC article he wrote at the 10th Amendment Center.com. He calls the rule of law a three-legged stool on which freedom sits. First leg requires that all laws be enacted in advance of the behavior they seek to regulate. That makes sense, right? And be crafted and promulgated in public by a legitimate authority. Okay, Stanford told us that too. So we have two people agreeing now that it has to be in public. Second leg is that no one is above the law and no one is beneath it. You heard this a lot lately. Thus, the law's restraints on force and fraud need to restrain everyone equally. And the law's protections against force and fraud must protect everyone equally. This leg removes from the discretion of those who enforce the law the ability to enforce it or to afford its protections selectively. So again, it applies to federal workers, bureaucracies, and the people in the government too, right? Not just you. They have to follow laws. In fact, it also has to be constitutional for them to make a law, right? But that's a different area. So the law needs to be constitutional. The third leg of the rule of law requires that the structures that promulgate, enforce, and interpret law be so fundamental. Congress writes the laws, the president enforces the laws, the courts interpret the laws. And you have the states with their powers too, who need to check the Constitution. The courts interpret laws that they cannot be changed retroactively or overnight by the folks who administer them. Stated differently, this leg mandates that only a broad consensus can change the goals or values or structured use. They cannot be changed by atrophy or neglect by crisis. So crisis doesn't just change the Constitution, and crisis doesn't change the law. And by the way, Madison and the founders and the framers of the Constitution wanted it to be a deliberative, slow process. If you were ever going to change it, that was by design. George Mason and the Virginia Declaration of Rights, he wrote that ahead of the Bill of Rights. And the Bill of Rights protect you, right? Amendments 5 through 8 protect you in courts specifically. Magna Carta, which George Mason had read, said this, parliament.uk list for the Magna Carta. Magna Carta is a Latin for Great Charter. First term was used in 1217 to distinguish it from the Charter of the Forest, a document that set out limits on the king's administration, this time of the royal forest areas of the country set aside for royal hunting. Both charters set out what the king could do and could not do. In other words, Magna Carta set out the laws which the king and everyone else had to follow for the first time. Copies of the Magna Carta were sent out to be read in each county of England so that everyone knew. Only 4 of the 63 clauses in the Magna Carta are still valid today. Of enduring importance to the people appealing to the Charter over the last 800 years are the famous clauses 39 and 40. No free man shall be seized, imprisoned, dispossessed, outlawed, exiled, or ruined in any way, nor in any way proceeded against, except by the lawful judgment of his peers and the law of the land. To no one will we sell, to no one will we deny or delay right of justice. So George Mason, before he wrote the Virginia Declaration of Rights, had read this. And you have a Bill of Rights protecting you. And a Constitution. That Bill of Rights is in the Constitution. Now, Matthew Spalding has a take on rule of law, the great foundation of our Constitution. Rule of law, the great foundation of our Constitution. Matthew Spalding at isi.org lays out 4 components about rule of law. And there's many others I looked at, but I just picked a few. First, the rule of law means a formal, regular process of law enforcement and adjudication. What we really mean by a government of laws, not of men, is the rule of men bound by law, not subject to the arbitrary will of others. So notice capricious, arbitrary whims we don't want. The rule of law means general rules of law that bind all people, including the government people, and are promulgated and enforced by a system of courts and law enforcement, not by mere discretionary authority, in order to secure equal rights to all citizens. Equal rights, not favored rights. Not picking out one group and favoring it. Not picking out an individual and favoring it. Not favoring individuals with power in the government. Rich and poor alike. All races alike. Equal in the eyes of the law. In order to secure equal under the law. Equal in the eyes of God. Equal under the law. And equal in the eyes of God. So, mainly for the law person, rule of law, it's equal under the law. In order to secure equal rights to all citizens, government must apply law fairly and equally through the legal process. You have due process, right? Notice, hearings, indictment, trial by jury, legal counsel, the right against self-incrimination. These are all parts of a fair and equitable, quote, due process of law. That provides regular procedural protections and safeguards against abuse by what? By whom? By government authority again, right? The Bill of Rights protects you from the federal government. Among the complaints lodged against the king in the Declaration of Independence was that he had obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers and was depriving us, in many cases, of the benefits of trial by jury. That's by Matthew Spalding. Second, he says the rule of law means that these rules are binding on rulers and the ruled alike. If the American people wrote, here's Federalist 57, I like this paper, shall ever be so far debased as to tolerate a law not obligatory on the legislature as well as on the people will be prepared to tolerate anything but liberty. Now that's an important comment. I've talked about this in the men's groups. Why have I talked about this in men's groups? Because who's it up to? Who's it up to? Who's he talking about? Who is Madison talking about in 57? If this was a group and John Wilson was sitting right here, he would say, it's up to the people. Okay? Don't look to Washington. Don't always be looking to Washington. It's up to you, the people. And I'm going to read that again. Who has the power? You, the people. So it's up to me, you. Who has the responsibility to read laws, to pay attention, to know what's going on, and to stand and voice opposition to protect the Constitution and protect the rule of law? You, the people. And look what he says. Let's just read it again. Remember when Franklin said a republic if you can keep it. Who's he saying that to? Franklin is saying it to you. A republic if you can keep it. Let's go back and read a little bit of 57, not the whole thing. 57, shall ever be so far debased as to tolerate a law not obligatory on the legislature. So the people have to ensure that the legislature, that the agencies, that the bureaucracy follow their own laws, and the law must be constitutional. Okay? If the law is unconstitutional, the state governments, state legislatures, and the governors must call it out. We have to restore the Constitution along with restoring the rule of law, or we'll end up with gulags, which goes to limited government and everything, but we're focused on the rule of law. So that Federalist paper we've talked a lot about in the men's groups. So rule of law, and going back to Federalist 57, you, the people, must hold your state legislature, the Congress, the Supreme Court, and everybody responsible for what they do, and call all of those people out when they go beyond the Constitution, when they go beyond rule of law. So as all are subject to the law, so all government and citizens, indeed all persons, are equal before the law, and equally subject to the legal system and its decisions. No one is above the law in respect to enforcement. No one is above the law in respect to enforcement. We're back to the article now here. No one is privileged to ignore the law, just as no one is outside the law in terms of its protection. Do you believe that's happening today? Think about it, reflect, watch. It's your republic. You have to keep it. You have to watch all these people voice peacefully your opposition to unconstitutional laws, unconstitutional acts, or where you see them not following the laws themselves, or where you see them picking, choosing favorites, or pushing an ideology that doesn't match with the rule of law. In other words, pushing an ideology with the rule of man, not rule of law, and not just following rule of law. Federalist 51, Madison says this, and I think this is a good one. I pulled this for you, gentlemen. In framing a government which is to be administered by men over men. This is one of the best Federalist papers, by the way, 51. I think it's my favorite. The great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed. And then the next place, here's the important one for today. Oblige it to control itself. And within that Federalist paper, it says, talks about ambition, but meaning the branches need ambition to protect themselves from the other. As the phrase goes, all presumed innocent until proven guilty. All are presumed innocent until proven guilty, right? That's one thing big and different in America. Everybody's innocent until you're proven guilty. We don't want to get into what that one person said. That person doesn't have to prove his innocence. You have to prove he's guilty. In America, we are innocent until proven guilty. And you hear the dialogue on this changing as of late. Or people are found guilty on social media, not good, before the case comes. We see this equal application of equal laws reflected in the Constitution's references to citizens and persons rather than race, class, or some other distinction. As in the Fifth Amendment's language that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. So the Fifth Amendment, due process of law. Third, the rule of law implies that there are certain unwritten rules or generally understood standards to which specific laws and lawmaking must conform. There are some things that no government legitimately based on the rule of law can do. Many of these particulars were developed over the course of the history of British constitutionalism. So there can be no ex post facto laws, that is, laws that classify an act as a crime leading to punishment after the act occurs. Nor can there be bills of attainder, which are laws that punish individuals or groups without a judicial trial. We've already mentioned the requirement of due process, but consider also the great writ of habeas corpus. No person may be imprisoned without legal cause. So, habeas corpus we don't want suspended. Rule against double jeopardy. No person can be tried or punished twice for the same crime. Madison wrote in Federalist 44, are contrary to the first principles of the social compact and to every principle of sound legislation. He's saying bills of attainder, ex post facto laws, and laws of impairing the obligation of contracts are contrary to the first principles of the social compact. Lastly, even though much of its operation is the work of the courts and judges, the rule of law ultimately is based on and emphasizes the centrality of lawmaking. That is why, although we have three co-equal branches of government, the legislature is the first among equals. So they created the legislature to be powerful, but we have seen that the Supreme Court now sometimes likes to write law, like with the Affordable Care Act, or write something into it like a tax, change it. But as those who make the law are themselves subject to some law above them, the rule of law, especially in terms of key procedural and constitutional concepts, stands above government. By definition and by enforcement, it is what a formal restraint on government. It judges government in light of a higher standard associated with those ideas. They do not change day to day or on a whim. You can't plan with that. You can't plan business. Separation of powers, constitution, federalism, written law, state governments, free markets. You move away from those and you're moving towards tyranny, totalitarianism, which affects you in your pursuit of what? Happiness. Your life, liberty, property. Freedom gives you choices and opportunity. Rule of law, if you help protect it, helps protect you, helps protect your private property, your life, and your liberty. One set of law for one group or one individual won't work if it doesn't apply to this individual and this group. We don't want different tiers for different groups and different individuals. We don't want our political opponents attacked in America. We do want free speech protected and not have the government going after people for just speaking what kind of policy they want or that they disagree with something. Rule of law and freedom of speech are important. They are American principles we were founded on. Now, the choice is yours. Many people say the rule of law is dead. You've seen it abused. An America with rule of law or an America with arbitrary rule of man, where you don't know what will happen in the morning or in the middle of the night, and which could lead and would lead to many to the gulag. Don't let it slip away. Stand peacefully for it. Talk about it. Share it with everybody. Stand for it. It's up to us to restore the Constitution and restore the rule of law. We, the people. We have to remember we need men of virtue. You can say a nation of laws or a nation of men, but really it's a nation of laws and men of virtue, right? Because if you don't have men of virtue, they're going to get around the laws. They're going to get around the Constitution, and you've seen that. We've seen the Constitution denigrated by the federal government taking too much power, by people abusing it. Washington warned the nation, let it simply be asked, where is the security for property, for reputation, for life, if the sense of religious obligation desert the oaths, which are the instruments of investigation in courts of justice? So a nation of laws and men of virtue is necessary. Restore the rule of law so we don't have to live in fear of the gulag. Forging better men, stronger men, better thinkers, groups of men, and fellowship. If you like this video, please comment, like, subscribe, hit the notification button. Thank you.